Since the conclusion of World War II, our world has sadly witnessed numerous wars. Currently, we are witnessing another distressing conflict unfold in Ukraine, accessible to us through television, the internet, and social media. While war has the potential to bring out the best in people, it also exposes the worst aspects of humanity. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia stands out among recent conflicts, revealing the harsh and brutal nature of war. For historians, this conflict has vividly resurrected the tragedies of World War II in our modern era. The distressing scenes include mass killings, indiscriminate shelling, and the deliberate targeting of civilians. Moreover, the brutality extends to torture, internment camps, the abduction of Ukrainian children to be raised as Russians in Russia, and the heinous crime of rape. The victims range from elderly women to young girls and boys, and even wives subjected to such atrocities in front of their husbands. These crimes are unfortunately common in areas of conflict, but in Europe, where advanced weaponry and omnipresent cameras are abundant, we are confronted with a first-hand view of the unfolding horrors. For historians who study World War II, looking at the war in Ukraine provides insight into what the war was really like. The atrocities that occurred there make the events of 80 years ago feel more real. One heartbreaking aspect of World War II is the story of the comfort women, a term used politely to describe the forced kidnapping or coercion of women and girls by the Japanese army to provide comfort to their soldiers. In many cases, this so-called comfort was a euphemism for mass-scale sexual slavery. Although records exist in Japan, China, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Papua New Guinea, they are incomplete and only reveal part of the story. Japan has been hesitant to openly discuss this dark chapter in its history. However, in the past 2 decades, there has been a greater effort to acknowledge the guilt of their army, offer apologies, and provide some restitution. Despite these efforts, many surviving comfort women feel that it falls short of what is needed. Time has passed, and most of the victims have passed away, but their memory is deeply ingrained in the national identity of the countries occupied by Japan during World War II. The impact extends beyond the victims themselves. Not only are the children of the comfort women now elderly, but very few were able to have children due to the years of sexual abuse they endured. Many were left physically sterile from the repeated punishing abuse, and mentally, the trauma prevented them from considering intimate relationships. The common dream of having children and grandchildren was taken away from these women, leaving a lasting void in their lives. During the war, it is believed that almost 500,000 women were taken from their homes to serve Japanese troops. Many of these women were poor and didn't have much education. Some were forcefully taken, literally grabbed off the street. Shockingly, some were young girls who hadn't even experienced their first period. Others were deceived into captivity with promises of well-paying jobs in a different place, perhaps in a big city nearby, or even in Japan. The Japanese military secret police were responsible for many of these crimes. Unfortunately, some women and girls were taken by their fellow countrymen, often members of criminal gangs. At times, groups of men would work as contractors for the Japanese, ensuring a specific number of girls in exchange for money. Some families unknowingly sent their daughters and sisters away, hoping for a better future elsewhere. An unusual aspect of the comfort women issue is that many of them were Japanese. In the late 1930s and 40s, the Japanese government was deeply fascist, striving to emulate what it believed was the hyper-masculine culture of the samurai. The distressing abduction of comfort women seemed less about subjugating foreign populations for Japanese purposes and more like a war on women. The term comfort woman in Japanese, which translates to a consoling or comforting woman, starkly contrasts with the harsh reality faced by the women involved. However, for historical accuracy, a few exceptionally attractive women were exclusively owned by high-ranking Japanese officers and officials, possibly enjoying a relatively better life as long as they pleased their superiors. Apart from the confusing official language, the comfort women were given different names by the Japanese, revealing their true feelings towards those they captured: Japanese, Asian, and in some cases, European women. The European women were captured when the Japanese took control of former European colonies in Asia. Hurtful terms like public toilet depositories and officially units of war supplies were used to describe them. Unfortunately, many of these women and girls died while being held captive due to various reasons such as hunger, diseases, beatings, bleeding, shootings for disobedience, and more. Many comfort women, already on the verge of death, were forced out of whatever little shelter they had and left to fend for themselves in unfamiliar places. Sadly, most of them didn't survive long in those harsh conditions. In some instances, especially in the Philippines, women and young girls who were taken as comfort women were compelled to pay for their own medical care if they contracted diseases. However, they had no money because they weren't paid for the services they were forced into. You can probably guess how they managed to pay their bills. The concept of comfort women was aimed at reducing the number of public rapes committed by the Japanese in the lands they conquered. This wasn't out of concern for the morality or well-being of the victimized women. Rather, politicians and officers were motivated by the realization that these public or barely concealed rapes were causing unrest in the occupied territories. The hope was that by keeping the women hidden away, such unrest could be avoided. The establishment of comfort stations, where women were kept during World War II, had another purpose besides providing a place for Japanese troops. One reason was to reduce the spread of venereal diseases among the soldiers. While this may have been somewhat effective initially, the situation changed as the U.S. Navy started to destroy Japan's merchant fleet. This led to a scarcity of condoms and medicine, forcing comfort women to reuse them after rinsing. Many Japanese soldiers were reluctant to use condoms, risking their health. Consequently, from late 1943 onward, the rates of venereal diseases increased compared to before the establishment of comfort stations. The movie Paradise Road, 1997, vividly portrays the lives of European and Indonesian women captured on Sumatra during World War II. One of the women, after enduring hardships as a prisoner, decides to accept the Japanese offer to work in the officers' quarters. Although she is aware of the expectations, she believes it is only for the commanding officer. Despite receiving pretty dresses and living in a nice house, she becomes a victim of physical abuse by the officer and is subjected to the advances of his comrades. When the other women encounter her later, she is unrecognizable, her eyes staring blankly out of her bruised face. While this fate likely befell many women forced into sexual slavery, it is certain that most did not experience a life of luxury. Instead, they held on to the clothes they were initially taken in, or, at best, had a small suitcase for the anticipated office or factory job. As these clothes wore out, women might receive garments worn by deceased friends, or don rough burlap shifts, possibly originating from friends who succumbed to disease, beatings, or illness. In most cases, Japanese authorities responded leniently to soldiers who killed or beat women and girls. Punishments range from simple admonishments to potential reductions in rank. Only a few instances exist where Japanese soldiers face short-term imprisonment. For those accused or proven to have killed comfort women, the most common punishment was being transferred back to Japan, if any punishment occurred at all. If the clothes we talked about sound really bad, think about this. Many comfort stations where women and girls were kept were very close to where the fighting was happening. This mostly happened in China, where battles kept going on during the war, and in the Pacific. There are pictures of British or Australian soldiers talking to girls who were freed, helping them with their health. This happened mainly in Papua New Guinea, where many Japanese women from Japan who lived there before the war were treated badly. These women were the daughters of Japanese businessmen who worked on the Big Island. Most of these men went back to Japan, forgetting they had a daughter, or maybe not even knowing about her. One of the worst things that happened during the U.S.-Japanese War in the Pacific was in Saipan when the Americans invaded. At the end of the fight, Japanese soldiers and civilians, many forced to retreat by the Japanese army, were stuck on a narrow piece of land. In front of them were the U.S. Marines, who many Japanese thought were cannibals and baby killers because of crazy stories from the Japanese government. Some people, including comfort women, chose to jump off cliffs, sometimes with babies out of fear. Others were forced to do it by Japanese soldiers with bayonets. Some who refused were killed by Japanese soldiers who wanted to die and take as many with them as possible. Marine photographers filmed much of what happened on the cliffs. Even though women and girls were taken from many nations mentioned before, about 80% of all comfort women were from Korea, which Japan controlled since 1896. After the war, Kim Hook-soon, one of them, shared part of her story. She said, "When I was 17, Japanese soldiers came in a truck, beat us, and took us away. I was told I could earn money in a textile factory if I went. But on the first day I was raped, and it never stopped. I was born a woman, but never lived like one. I feel sick near men, not just Japanese, but all men, even my husband who saved me. I shiver when I see a Japanese flag. Why should I feel ashamed? I don't have to." She also told how she was raped 30 to 40 times every day during her time as a comfort woman. This caused a lot of physical pain and damage, and the emotional damage never went away. After the war, many survivors came back home, but they kept quiet about what they went through. Some couldn't bring themselves to face their families and chose not to return home at all. It wasn't until the 1980s that things started to change. The comfort women, with support from the women's movement that began in the 1960s, found the courage to demand justice and reparations from the Japanese government. However, this wasn't an easy journey. Japan took many years before agreeing to provide financial compensation, and even then, the amount was disappointingly small. Pressure mounted not only from the survivors, but also from their children, grandchildren, and even countries that were once Japan's adversaries during the war. Eventually, Japan issued apologies and increased the number of reparations, but most of the money ended up going to organizations set up to assist survivors. Unfortunately, many survivors never saw any of it. Though only a few dozen comfort women are believed to be alive today, women's rights groups and others continue to press Japan to take responsibility. In Korea, a significant symbol of this struggle is the peace statue in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. It portrays a comfort woman seeking justice. Similar statues have been erected outside Japanese embassies and consulates in various locations, including the United States. Despite Japan's repeated requests for their removal, most of these statues still stand today. If you found this information valuable, please subscribe to our channel for more insightful content on historical events and their impact on our world today.